I'm going to record the conversation, and it's almost 9 o'clock. I think Tim Schmidt will be joining us in a second, but we have a critical mass to get started. Does anyone else want to make any other quick comments or introduce yourself? I won't go around in a circle, but suffice it to say that we have a great we'll have a great conversation in the next hour. And if anybody wants to say anything else, feel free. Glad everyone's here. We may have a couple more people joining us. Pat is going to have to step out close to 9, just briefly, but he'll be back, hopefully, if the surveyor doesn't make off with him.
Should only take a few seconds, a few minutes, whatever. Handful of seconds.
John Sarver is the chair of our Environmental Commission. And
okay. Hey, John.
Does anybody else want to introduce themselves or state a question that's on their mind? Good morning, Tim.
Morning.
Well, we do these every week. It's an open dialogue, and encourage people to just share what's on their mind, share questions, as well as share thoughts that are coming to them. Welcome, Pat and Cliff, and some new faces. I'm just going to open it up to Tim. You sort of inspired part of this. Do you want to share your question for Pat, or one or two questions that you have briefly?
I mean, I think maybe not necessarily a question, but sort of a thought of moving forward. And after reading through all of Cliff's work on the green infrastructure, green GSI manual that Tri-County was putting out there, and absent, now that he's left and I'm not sure who's picking up the ball for him. I mean, how do we begin as a region to start really pushing that stuff? Because in my mind, the easiest way to do it is going to be from a regional approach.
Well, I can answer that in one word: watersheds. The concept of stormwater management knows no political boundary. Water doesn't pay attention to political parties. It just comes and goes the way it wants to, and the lay of the land is what forces it, and the texture of the land that it falls on drives what you need to do. And I have never met two watersheds that are alike, whether they're large ones or small ones or sub watersheds or whatever. They're all created differently, and they all have unique characteristics. We should start out probably by understanding what we are as a culture, I think, really, because that really bases every decision that we make when it comes to water. Water is one of 4 things that we have to have a society, stormwater management. And let's just look at society as the top of a table. And the 4 legs that are on that table are the infrastructure that holds it up. And that infrastructure has to be a place to flush your toilet, a place to put your stormwater and deal with it, a consistent source, and a transportation system. And without one of those, the table will fall over. It's just that simple. And so those 4 things, out of those 4 table legs that hold us up as a society, apparently the bear just my dog went crazy. Out of those 4 things, the only one that's not visible, or the only one that's visible, is transportation. All the other infrastructure, the stormwater stuff, sewers, drinking water, sanitary sewers, and so on, are all underground. And nobody really understands how to deal with them or how to make them work. So when we design ordinances or standards for zoning, we have to keep all of that in mind. And you have to understand that economics, lifestyle, even religion drives how we treat stormwater and sanitary water and so on. Bedroom communities are different than inner cities. Inner cities are different than industrial complexes. We have to write ordinances that are not binding. In other words, if you put in an ordinance a set of rules, then those are what you have to live with. However, if you don't put any rules in there and you say that you have a goal to manage the water in a good, efficient way that's environmentally friendly and so on, then it leaves the whole book is open to all kinds of possibilities. One of the main
Pat,
is yep.
I just want to say, I think we're on the same page with you here. The question
Okay.
is, how do we move forward from where we are right now?
Well,
I think
you have
you've
to
got,
start getting, yeah, you have to start getting the elected officials and the decision makers to pay attention to water, stormwater, and stormwater regulation from a broader perspective and from a non-political perspective. I'm going to have to go talk to the surveyor, so I'll be back in just a few minutes, okay?
okay, sounds great.
All right,
And
so I'll just let you, I'll be right back.
Okay,
from a more action, look how we take action from what we've done so far with this manual. And just, at a practical level, it sounds like they're going to post that position in the new year. And, the GLRC is 17 different communities. They are all permit required to maintain their permits. They're very motivated to get somebody in there. So I don't think there's going to be a huge delay just because of the fact that it's a service that they need. And one of the priorities of that person and the instructions that I've left behind for them or for Lauren, the other planner at Tri-County, is to regroup that ordinance subcommittee here within a month or two, and to try to put like that sheen of approval over this thing. We don't know if it needs to be officially adopted. We don't think so. It's more of a resource document. But once we have these, the input from the county, and Tim gave some great comments, and I just sent it over to my planning director here now that I'm at East Lansing for some insights. I think that you're more than welcome to go ahead with what is there now if it suits you. I don't anticipate anything changing too much. A lot of my concerns, I didn't develop a lot of this code. It came from planning experts in this space from, University of California, from the Wisconsin Sea Grant. I'm not the one to tell them that their boilerplate language is wrong. My concern, and Tim helped with some of this, was, is it in a practical format? Is this something that planners could pick up and use? Does it seem like something that that is workable at that ground level? Because I think the reason, everyone cares about this stuff, obviously Meridian Township, East Lansing, they're very progressive on these issues. But when it comes to staffing and, people are overburdened with stuff, I think resources like this, where you can just flip to and say, oh, this is what town across the road is going to be doing if they look into this, this is what is pre-cleared. I think that lowers the burden on those communities so much, and just on the staffing level. So I think that, once the GLRC has a finalized document in whatever, term you want to use for finalization, I think that it's going to be up to those individuals around the table, the representatives to the GLRC, to push this. And that's why we have kind of brought this project into the Capital Area Sustainability Partnership, knowing that, the engineers are overworked and overburdened, and we need as many people kind of pushing for this and embarking about it as possible. And so I think that at the practical level, and if in a couple months, maybe that will be that final document, and then people can push ahead. But it's of course going to be, have to be a priority of the staff. And it doesn't seem to be an issue in Meridian, but in terms of getting it adopted regionally, it's just a practical barrier. I don't know if that answered. I kind of rambled there.
No, that's very encouraging. Pat has to deal with a surveyor. He'll be right back. Welcome, Paul and Courtney, and everyone else who I haven't personally welcomed. Again, this is-
Glad to be here and apologize for being 10 minutes late. I'm fresh off the treadmill and unpresentable, so I smiling face at the moment.
awesome. I hope you can join us at more than one of these, but
Sure.
we're talking about how we can sort of move forward on promoting green stormwater infrastructure. Cliff is encouraging that they're hiring a new staff person to replace him.
Yep.
Paul will be sure of it.
Yeah, right. While everybody was playing nice, it was clear we needed to have pushback because Tri-County would have preferred to parcel this out to 3 current staffers or however, whoever had time at the moment. It was not headed in a good way, and the delegates from the different permit holders were polite but firm and said, no, we got to have somebody at least approaches Cliff. I don't know if we have been phenomenally lucky. Aaron before him and Cliff have just been excellent people, and they have helped the Lansing region make a go of what is a classic unfunded mandate, and that has created pushback and really not always been a detriment, not always been sometimes the program is in other places has been a detriment to green principles because it was so badly handled administratively. And so I think we're just rightfully proud of that.
we have a question, Bill.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to chime in on the sort of bigger picture question that we started with of how do we move forward, and certainly getting the right personnel in place at TCRP is important. The question of whether we act locally or at a broader scale is an important one. And I think, to my understanding of what we're doing in Meridian Township at the moment, is kind of operating mainly in the special case arena. Right, we're trying to tweak our mixed use plan unit development ordinance so that we encourage kind of green stormwater infrastructure. Because someone is asking for a permit, we can raise that issue at that point. And then the question becomes, how do we get that same sort of behavior change when people are doing development by right? And one of the opportunities that I think we've talked about in this forum that might give us a way forward is we see the Drain Commissioner's office doing an awful lot of pretty, well, aggressive might not be the right word, but certainly requiring more stormwater detention as time goes on. And my observation is that those are largely focused on volume, perhaps more than water quality treatment, which I assume is mainly an issue of cost and requirements that can be imposed on the developers. And I wonder if that's an entry point we might look at in terms of upgrading, right? Making our stormwater detention facilities deluxe rather than the baseline. So I hope that's something we get a chance to talk about today.
I can answer part of that question. Go ahead.
No, Pat, if you're back, take it.
Okay. Well, we haven't, the drain office hasn't had a state permit, stormwater permit since 2013. And it comes down to an argument of holding water back. If you look at the way that water used to run off the land back in the 1700s, and you look at it today, when you put a mall up or a new subdivision, All that water runs into the river, causing more flooding, and it runs all its pollution that way, and so on. Well, the DEQ is on the right track with trying to hold more water back on the landscape. When you make a land use change and then you live with that land use change, you have to live with it for the next 50 years or so. So in trying to do so, we are trying to get developers to hold back more water than they did before. Now, drain commissioners across the state and municipalities across the state have given into the DEQ's or Eagle now desire to hold a lot more water back on the land by forcing them to write rules internally that are based on recharge. And having recharge happen doesn't work. I mean, I've seen it fail over and over and over and over again. Recharging water into the ground, one, pollutes our drinking water. Two, it doesn't really function for very long. You can imagine all the non-point source pollution, everything from road tires, from rubber, from tires to whatever, plugging up the holes in a recharge area. It turns into a big cereal bowl full of water. And it doesn't really work. So municipalities that stand by the concept of reducing volume of water off the land, because there are two things to look at: the volume of water and the rate that it flows off the land. And we need to not pay so much attention to the rate that it flows off, but we need to pay more attention to the volume of that water. Because over time, it multiplies exponentially with every new development, and the river just becomes overwhelmed. We're doing everything that we can to try to reduce the flow of water to the river. Several of my drains do it by more than 90%. I've got one drain that we built that reduces the flow of water to the river by 100%. We don't put a drop of water in the river, not one flipping drop. And we deal with all the non-point source pollution internal to the drain. And I believe that we can do that. And the standards at our drain office are built to try to get developers to pay attention to that concept. If the townships had the same rules and regulations that forced developers to play that by that same type of rule, then it would be so much easier for us as stormwater managers. I don't care if I ever get a state permit for managing stormwater. What are they going to do? Take me to court? I don't really care. I think they're on the wrong track. I had a long conversation with the Washtenaw County Drain Commissioner, who is convinced that recharging is the way to go. He's already got 2 ponds that he built that are already not recharging. They're just plugged up. You got to spend a fortune to unplug them. You got to dig up the bottom. You got to drag it. You got to dredge them out. After 5 years, 10 years, they just don't work. And especially here in Michigan, if you take percolated sand, which flows a lot of water, and you fill it full of small organic material and or non-organic material, metals and so on, dissolved metals and so on, it all collects in the bottom of that basin, and it builds itself up around the sides to where the recharge doesn't happen at all. And I've seen it fail over and over and over again. I just refuse to issue permits for recharging anywhere in this county. I just won't do it. And the DEQ doesn't like that, so they won't give me a permit. So that's
I guess what
okay
I was
with me. I
asking,
don't really care.
I guess what I was asking in terms of upgrading the facilities that you're causing to be built is, can we as a municipality do something to encourage the deluxe version of a detention basin, so that it's not just mown grass that collects trash, that there's other vegetation, that there's that I feel like we regulate wetlands more tightly than the state. Can we help regulate these little tiny wetlands, these detention basins in a way that raises their functionality?
Absolutely. Bill, you're on target. That's exactly what you have to do. You have to write rules that make those, there's detention and retention. When you detain water for a short period of time, that's one issue. Then when you retain water for an indefinite period of time, that's another issue. And what they're trying to encourage at a state level is the retention of water for a longer period of time, for an indefinite period of time, by recharging it in the water, not allowing it to flow off the land. But I'm absolutely convinced that I'm a scientist, and ideal fluvial physics is my issue. And I can tell you flat out that managing stormwater is not a game of legislation. It's a game of practicality. It's a game of trying to use your common sense when it comes to managing water off of any particular watershed. And interestingly enough, a guy by the name of Powell, Wesley Powell, around the time of the Civil War, was a U.S. geologist. And then when Grant became president, after Lincoln died, he had another president, and then Grant. Anyway, Grant instructed Powell to go out west and make boundaries for all the Western territories. And he came back with a map that, I've got a picture of the map. It's incredible. It's all watersheds, like the Colorado River would be one state, right? So he put the water resource into state boundaries that are based on watershed movement. And President Grant fired him. He says states are square. Well, we can't think like that anymore. In other words, your ordinances have to be practical to that particular watershed. And that watershed may not know what a political boundary is. So the township next to Meridian on either side, or Allen Township, or Williamstown Township may have other rules. You need to have consistency in what you're trying to do, and you have to write the ordinances with all the other townships and municipal governments, even the Clinton County and Washtenaw County, and they all touch Ingham County in some way. And you have to have them manage it the same way with the same set of rules. It has to be a regional thing or a watershed approach. If it don't do that, Bill, you can hang it up, because it's not going to work. It'll fail within 10 years.
Pat, can I add my practical experience? We dodged a bullet with Meridian on the Daniels project when that LaFontaine car dealership went away. As it was, we were headed for there really needs to be better coordination with between us and the planning people, because by the time LaFontaine came to us for their drainage review and drainage permits, their site plan had already gone pretty far, if not finalized, by Meridian. And it was tons of curb and gutter for the parking lots and stick trees and and plus they were going to need us to move the Daniels drain off its historic easement. And we'd have required them to pay for it, but but why should anybody, why shouldn't you work with the land the way it is? And so that saved us substantial drain money and confusion by just being able to replace the drain across. It kind of winds the way where the lowest land was, when the drain was first constructed a century ago. And that's a good place for it. And somehow we ought to figure out a way to say you gotta work with the landscape, and it'll be a lot better. There were decent trees that we're going to have to go. And again, I use the insult advisedly, stick trees. We say that fairly often, and we condemn that fairly often in the, in the drain office. And in fact, we may end up putting some more trees along the traditional route and course there, because we have to balance the south side of Grand River on the Daniels. The landowner wanted rid of all the cottonwoods that were around their detention basin, and want a more open landscape situation for themselves, not to pave it, but just to for a variety of reasons. So we need to replace trees, and we may end up putting them on our easement in LaFontaine. I remember as we were finalizing our Daniels plans, that was a bullet dodged, and it says to me that there is room for talking about upsizing the green space and the quality of the green space. It's, but I just think that's one case for you, Bill.
Yeah, actually, the LaFontaine came to the Environmental Commission for a wetland use permit back in March of 2019. And our ordinance stipulates that if you're going to propose something that has an impact on a wetland, you have to specify the alternatives that were considered that might have avoided an impact on a wetland. And when I raised that objection, it did not carry. The permit was issued, and we saw what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking specifically of all the wonderful stuff that you guys are doing up in the Mud Lake drain and all the basins that have been constructed there. And as I look at other basins along Grand River in front of Denny's and such, if they're done to the minimum standard, they become mowed grass trash pits.
Yep.
And they could be something better. And can we as a township,
Absolutely.
I mean, our township board is investing in planting trees. All the trees that are out in Chippewa Middle School were purchased by the township board and by others. So we're in a kind of a tree planting mode. So if there are things that we can do to improve stormwater through that tree planting effort or through other regulatory means, I think we have an appetite for that.
Yeah, Phil, you're exactly correct. The concept, I'd like to get away from the detention retention argument and get into what are you going to do if you hold back 20% more water? And you have to understand the physics of the storms. Since 1905 to today, 95% of all the storms are 2 inches or less. Just keep these numbers in your head for just a minute. If 95% of all the storms are 2 inches or less, all we really have to do is deal with 2 inches. If we can keep 2 inches on any particular site at any given time, we should be able to reduce the flow of water, thereby reducing flooding to the Red Cedar Basin exponentially, and you can't do that by just sticking it in a hole in the ground. You have to somehow manipulate it and get rid of it. Transevaporation is a huge tool, and low impact design and vegetation of all kinds. And I can give you a list of ones that are better than others. We've had a lot of experience with low impact design. Our toll gate drain, for example, doesn't put a drop of water in the Red Cedar River. It just doesn't. We handle it on the golf course and in the wetland complex that we built. We handle it, but the way that we handle it is a regular pond will evaporate something like 1/8 of an inch of water a day. Okay. And if you have the right kinds of trees, plants, and bushes, your transevaporation rate goes way up. The pollution loading that happens to any of those storm systems is all turned into inert material. For example, iron turns into rust, becomes iron oxide, copper, all of the different things that comes off brake pads, arsenic, you name it. You can deal with it within those soil compounds. Just by landscaping a development with low impact design on the islands, and most parking lots have islands where the water runs off of. Why don't you just make them downies instead of uppies, you know? and collect the water in them.
Again, I think we're with you.
Those are the kind of things that you have to do to retain 2 inches of water on any site. Our new standards that are coming out this next spring are going to require all development to hold back 2 inches of water. Now, if we could do that throughout the whole water system, the whole Red Cedar water system, or watershed, which is quite large, by the way, we would have made a huge step forward. The U.S. Corps of Engineers and I argue all the time, and they want to put gates, like dikes, portable dikes underneath US 127 and keep it from going into Urbandale down there in the Lansing Township area. And the only way to eliminate flooding is to not put water in the river. Just don't put it there, you know, that's all. That's all you have to do.
You mentioned,
don't have to do anything else.
You mentioned new standards. I think part of what Tim has mentioned in the past is, you know, how do we share these and how do we promote them sooner, you know, on the developers side before the project is designed, so that when we're talking to a developer at Meridian, how do we articulate what we want to occur and promote that, not just in Meridian, but in the entire region? So am I articulating that correctly, Tim?
Yeah, you have to start with goals. You can't start with specifics, because specifics don't address where you want to be in the end. You have to understand that there's a certain amount of goal development that you want to achieve, and you have to reduce pollution into our water system, and you have to have some way to catch the pollution and some way to manage the volume. And if you can do those two things and do it through a series of policies first, and then outline options that can be used, not rules, not saying that they have to do this or have to do that, but options that they can look at and their engineers can learn. And you'll be surprised at how much more effective you're going to be. In 1975, there was a flood. It was the equivalent of about a 40-year flood. And Meridian Township got hit really hard with that. It was on the Red Cedar River. And I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was quite a while ago. The Meridian Township passed an ordinance saying that no one will ever build in the floodplain again in Meridian Township. Within 3 years, they allowed a developer to build in the floodplain. I mean, you know, it's just crazy. Most of our inner cities are built around rivers. Lansing's no different. That's the way it was. What are you going to do? Pick up those buildings and move them back to Europe? I mean, you're not going to be able to do that. So somehow or another, we have to build infrastructure to meet today's goals and objectives by addressing the way that we develop the land today. And you do that through a series of writing rules and making sure that you understand the physics of it. Look, when you declare war on water, water always wins.
Well, Courtney,
water never loses.
Courtney Wazinski, our trustee, has made sure that we include green infrastructure in our goals for the coming year. And Tim has put parking as a priority in 2022. So I think we're heading in that direction. For those who haven't had a chance to speak, or if you haven't had a chance, let's make sure we get people's ideas on the table here. Cliff, you had.
I was just gonna say that, what Pat was saying, what Bill was saying, I think both of those kind of come together in that green infrastructure manual. You know, it's not intended to promote more red tape, but to promote more options and to encourage green infrastructure through language. So defining green infrastructure signals to developers that this is something that you're comfortable with. This is something that the community is, you know, just aware of. Putting it in mission statements and purpose statements in the code, that this is a priority for the community. But then to parking too, you know, right now there are in Meridian, there's rules to, you know, for parking lot islands. You know, you mentioned innie versus outie or upper versus downy, whatever the terminology was for those. But just by, you know, for the township to be able to assist, you know, in the achievement of their goals and also in offering flexibility to developers and the county, by removing those barriers to within the code language, by offering options to developers to have curb cuts and to use those for bioretention rather than being specific and strict as you are now. There's specific species spacing requirements, there's specific curb requirements, sizing requirements. By removing some of that red tape and opening up those as options for bioretention or for just innovative design, I think that is the intention, rather than to create new rules, but opening up the rule books to allow them to be more creative in their management of stormwater.
Yeah, I think Cliff has got a handle on it. That's exactly correct. There's an old Latin expression, expressio unus est exclusio alternius. And that means that anytime you make a list, you have to stay to that list. But if you create options, you give an infinite number of outcomes. And if you have goals, you can shoot for those goals. And by making the exclusion of all other options, by making a list of things you have to do, is, I think, a big mistake in writing rules today. And a lot of our laws, you know, we have to have laws that say you can't murder, but for Christ's sakes, there's a lot of different ways that you can hold 2 inches of water on your land. And we have to be open to all of that. And I think Cliff's got the right idea in the way that he's composing his little set of rules and goals and objections. You know, that makes a lot of sense to me. So.
Pat's talk about goals makes me wonder about, you know, our master plan review. Maybe that's an opportunity to, maybe it's already covered in our master plan, these sorts of kind of goals related to water management, but or maybe there should be some attention paid to that when we kind of do the review.
Absolutely, John, you're right there. And we have to act as a single unit. Even though we're 16 different townships, I don't know how many cities and villages we have in Ingham County, we have to all act the same way with the same set of rules and the same set of objections or goals and objects that we have to try to achieve. For example, our Montgomery drain, which is a Frandor, you've seen a lot of activity around there. That is about a square mile watershed that contributes 50 to 70,000 pounds of pollution annually to the Red Cedar. We plan on building a system within the Montgomery Drainage District, which is about 1 square mile, as I said, that will, in fact, take about 95% of all that pollution away. Because we know that occasionally you're going to have 5 inches of water, but most of the time it's 2 inches or less. So if we can handle 2 inches of water and continually polish it and maintain some sense of maintenance on that subject, on that 1 square mile, we should be able to eliminate at least 95% of all the pollution going into that river. Plus, you can take 2 inches of water and store it all the time and process it, move it around, that kind of thing.
Courtney?
Good morning. I just want to speak to 2 things on behalf of Meridian Township. To Bill, we just passed our 2022 goals, which does include revising the the master plan, and we added using support from the green infrastructure. So you know that just happened last night. So that is in the works, and we'll work with Environmental Commission, the Drain Commission, we'll work with Tim's office for sure, to make sure that's being included as much as possible. And in our MUPUD, we also have, we call them amenities. So it isn't you have, like Mr. Lindeman, you said, it's not you have to do this, this, or this, but if you do this, this, or this, you have, you get more feedback or tax, breaks. So that I like that idea. And then you also made a very good point that this is a regional issue. There is no water boundaries. And so it'll be really important that when we're going through our master plan, that we're considering that as well, and looking at our adjacent, our neighbors, including Cliff and East Lansing and the townships as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's relatively new, passed last night, and we will incorporate that bill, and we'll work with the Environmental Commission as well.
Good job, Courtney.
We have a question from Valerie, who's in bad reception. She's asking if there's plans in the works for the Lake Lansing watershed. I know there's a lot of construction that's been happening there, but do Paul or Pat want to respond to that real quickly?
Sure, I could respond to it. Yeah, the Lake Lansing is not a natural lake. It has about a 14-foot dam that we're going to be rebuilding here in the next 3 to 5 years, something like that. The dam is made out of concrete and it has some cracks in it. Our structural engineers have taken a look at it, and we can get away with about another 10 years, but we're going to have to really start construction on it here in the next 3 to 5 years. And I'm trying to understand Lake Lansing. It's the land mass or the watershed around it that contributes water to Lake Lansing is very small. In other words, it doesn't have much turnover. It collects water from the watershed and it fills up, and we have a court-ordered lake level that we manage, that our office manages on the lake. And it's swimming in Lake Lansing. I don't want to sound like it's a bad thing, but it's like swimming in a bathtub after 10 other people have all taken a bath, The water stays there. It doesn't recirculate. It doesn't leave. It's not a natural body of water. It's a lake that wants to be a swamp, and we made it a lake, and it just wants to keep reverting back to a swamp. That's why it fills in with weeds so much, and it doesn't have much water circulation in it at all. It was dredged back in the late 1800s and dammed up. It actually is 2 kettle ponds. You have a southern lobe and a northern lobe, and when the glacier left about 12,000 years ago, there was 2 chunks of ice that were left there, and that's what the term kettle pond comes from. And when they melted, they formed a body of water. For 10,000 years or even longer than that, it's been filling in with sediment. In the 1800s, it was a swamp. I mean, it was literally an emerging swamp. You could walk across there and so on.
So the dam reconstruction? The dam reconstruction
is going to happen in about 3 to 5 years. It has to happen. The assessment for that will go to the people that benefit the most. It'll be a county public works project. But we'll get it. I don't have any super details about it, but we're going to do everything we can to make it more natural and easier to maintain. But the Lake Lansing watershed and Lake Lansing itself it used to have $5,000 shacks around it, and now it's got multi-million-dollar houses, and they all want to fertilize their lawns, and they all, they want a nice, clean waterfront approach to it without putting vegetation out there and so on and so forth. And it's always going to be a soup of chemicals. It's just the way the nature of it is. It's a very small landmass that feeds water to it. So it's problematic. It is part of our drain system. We have 4 drains that go into it. I think there's 4, might be 5. And they all collect water from a very small area of land and they dump it right directly into the lake. And if you think of the wind going across there and the evaporation rate of that lake, it's very difficult to replace the water. Into July, the water usually winds up below the head of the dam, and I'm ordered to keep it up. So prior to that, I have to keep the dam, the boards in the dam at such a level that it maintains as much water throughout the season as possible. And then into the fall, we have a low level of water in there, but it's a mess. We got multi-million dollars worth of property around a lake that wants to be a swamp, and a swamp that was made into a lake.
Thanks, Pat. Ken, Dra?
Thank you. So building upon that, what we're trying to do out here, we have this build back a buffer kind of campaign, trying to protect the watersheds, put in native plants and that kind of thing. And so it sounds like exactly what you're saying is, having that natural vegetation to help clean the water and help filter it. And then looking at not fertilizing would help Lake Lansing, but probably the watershed in general. Can you speak a little bit more to that, please?
Sure. Putting a buffer, a linear buffer along a long stretch of drain or river or any moving body of water with periodic inputs into it in my opinion, it's a good idea, but it doesn't really solve the issue at hand. The land is not all slopes down doesn't all slope down that way. In the early 90s, the U.S. Corps of Engineers and Region 5 EPA and I got together at some big conference. It was about 2 weeks long, and we had some people from all over the country there. And we came up with this idea about bubble buffers, which is really not making a linear buffer, but making where the water goes into the drain or the river, but making larger areas where the water could go into, from which it could then go into the ditch or the river or the drain. And that seemed to be more logical, because if you drew a level line across a linear stretch of land and between the ditch and the upland, water will only go in one place or 2 places. It won't go in evenly over that hill. So the buffer becomes wildlife habitat, which I totally and completely agree with. And I think that we have to offer vegetation shade to keep the water cooler. The warmer the water gets, the worse it gets. There's a lot of things that we can do with vegetation buffers, but to accomplish water quality, you really need to filter the water before it goes into that drain or into that river. And in order to do that, you have to expand your buffers, have to go out maybe even 1/8 of a mile or 1/10 of a mile out to have some buffer that turns back into a wetland. A lot of these farm communities have done everything they could to tile and drain the wetlands. There are lowlands that they can't grow any crops on annually because they're flooded all the time. I mean, once in a while they'll have a dry year and they can take some corn off of it, but those areas should be identified and made into water treatment centers. You can't build a house there. You're never going to get grass to grow, and you're never going to be able to drive a lawnmower on it, if you want to make a subdivision out of it. And you're never going to plant crops there that are successful. So to make these bubble buffers along the waterways is really the only answer that I can think of. And we worked on a theory trying to make bubble buffers reality. We lost the argument federally, and the federal government has made linear buffers along the ditches and along rivers. Part of its payback program, they can pay a landowner thousands of dollars to take his land out of farming production and make a buffer. I agree with putting buffers there. I just don't, from a term of water management, the buffers themselves don't work real well because the water doesn't go through the buffers. It just goes around them into a low spot into the ditch.
Pat, but I still think you'd say for Lake Lansing, these acres and acres of lawn down to the lake is not helpful. I mean, you really prime goose area and adds to the pollution that way. And if we could get people to put buffers along the lake, I think it would help. Just in
As
terms,
there are,
yeah,
there are places where buffers actually can do a lot of good around the lake. Obviously, the average goose in a 7-day period will poop over 7.5 pounds of manure. Believe that or not, but that's just a fact. And it's been studied several times. People have followed geese around picking up their manure and they weighed it. And the average adult goose has contributed a major amount of pollution. What geese don't like is foliage. They don't like bushes. They don't like they think that there's a fox in back of them to catch them. So that's why they hang out on golf courses and open cut cornfields. After the corn's been cut, they eat the residue of the corn and so on. But around Lake Lansing, the more lawns you have, the more geese you're going to have. And Ingham County Parks has taken it upon itself to try to landscape and discourage geese. At least it did. I think it still has that as an overall objection. Every time it remodels the park system up on Lake Lansing, it puts in as much foliage as it can to discourage the collection and gathering of geese and cleaning up of the manure.
We have about 9 more minutes. We want to let people kind of keep it to an hour. There's one question. If you have another question or something you would like to say, please raise your hand. But I think if I don't get a chance, I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight, this morning. Bill, take it away.
Really appreciate the talk about the lake and buffers. One thing we're working on here in the township is neighborhood ponds that were created for aesthetic purposes. And I know the Drain Commissioner's office has done some neat stuff down in Briarwood. So we're trying to look at some of those smaller bodies of water and stop throwing chemicals in and try to keep the geese out. The land tiling, we're exploring altering the tiles in the Davis Foster Preserve and trying to return the soils to its pre-development hydrology. And finally, last week, Director Schmidt alerted our Transportation Commission to a talk given by Suzanne Schultz, who's done some great work out in Grand Rapids. And one of the things that really caught my ear was we have a local policy of complete streets, but we don't own any roads, so we can't really do much to enforce it at the municipal level. But what she was talking about is when Grand Rapids went to a vital streets approach, that not only is building a roadway for all road users, but also making sure that those roadways, when they get reconstructed, do the best possible job of stormwater management. So I'm curious if you would support pushing that kind of a policy with the road department at a county level to join forces with your office.
Absolutely. There's a new director of the roads. Kelly is her name, and she is very good. She's an environmentalist, and she's open to any kind of this kind of change. I just want to tell you about roads a little bit. It's very important because if you look at Tower Gardens, I did a drain project up there that was almost $11 million. The way that we built that drain system up there saved us somewhere around 15 million. If we had done it with curb and gutter and concrete piping, it would have cost us around 23 million, 21 million, somewhere in there. But it wound up costing us about 11 million. And I know it was a bite to take off the top. It was 11 million is no chump change, but rebuilding that infrastructure, we wound up putting along, I rebuilt every road in that neighborhood. So in the rebuilding of the road, we put drainage in the road right of way off to the side with 12-inch and 24-inch perforated tiles rather than concrete. There isn't any curb and gutter in there to speak of. We noticed a couple different phenomena, and with environmental approach to road building, you can actually save millions and millions of dollars. What happened, we did 2 studies on it, and we found that when you build a road and you put down pavement, in the first year, you really don't see much movement on the pavement. But around the second year, you're going to wind up with hairline cracks. And then in the 3rd and 4th and 5th year, you wind up with potholes and those cracks because the pavement falls apart, because the roads are built not to drain the water underneath them. And in the toll gate drain, 24 hours a day, all year round, that water goes through those perforated pipes and gets dealt with in the drainage system. Only 90% of all the storms that fall in that neighborhood actually leave that neighborhood, and there isn't one basement that floods, not one. People's sump pumps, 60% of all the people there had sump pumps that ran almost 24 hours a day. Today, hardly any of them run. And what happened with the roads is we finished in 2008, I think. Within 10 years, we still don't have hairline cracks. Think of the millions of dollars in road repair that we saved by draining the underbelly of those roads. It was incredible. And I took that to the State Road Commission Association, and they threw me off the stage. They wouldn't hear it, you know? And I'm telling you, I talked to the engineers at the State Highway Department, and I talk to them all the time. And I brought it up, and they said, yeah, we understand that taking the water out from underneath the roadbed will add life to the roadbed. But how do you do that and do it safely? Well, I think that Meridian Township is lucky because it has some forward thinking when it comes to that. And you got a road commissioner director now, a road department, I think they call it, instead of a commission. Ingham County Road Commission director that's willing to listen to all those ideas. She's an engineer, understand she's an engineer, and we have to get, sometimes managing stormwater is getting engineers to think outside of the box. You know, instead of looking at that black book they learned in college that has rules for engineering, they have to think a little bit differently. And I hire people that are willing to think like that. And but I don't ask them to violate what they think is right. They have to tell me what's right. The decision to make a difference and go against your engineer, that's going to be something the township's going to have to learn to do, because a lot of the low impact design or green infrastructure does not meet the criteria set forth in engineering manuals. It just doesn't. So it's a fight between engineering, typical engineering, and the way that we do it today. For example, just real quickly, I think it's important for you to understand this. The toll gate drain in Lansing Township in the city of Lansing, it costs to move that water out of that neighborhood, separate the sewers from the sanitary and the stormwater and separate them, put 2 sewer lines in, and run that water to the river when it costs over $23 million. All right. I chose not to do that. We don't take the water anywhere, it stays right in there. And between Wood Street and Fairview Street, there's a little wetland complex I built. And then the golf course has ponds on it now that handle that water. I can handle a 500-year storm and not put 1 drop of water in the Red Cedar River. You know, and the pollution, it all turns inert, and about every 20 years, 25 years, I have to dredge those ponds out and haul the water away. We figured that over time, it's going to cost us around $35,000 a year to manage that system. All right. So we spend the money, and everybody argued with me about you're going to have to continue to pay money. Why not put concrete pipes in and not worry about it? Well, I'm here to tell you, that it's cheaper to do that. If you take the difference, that whole drain cost me 6.3 million. Now, if you take the difference between 6.3 million and 23 million and divide it by $35,000, you can maintain that sucker for 650 years and never spend what you saved. So you have to hire people to go out there and fix it. Who cares? You know, it doesn't make any difference. It's financially sound to be environmental. That's my point.
I
And
appreciate.
I think we can do it with stormwater.
I appreciate what you've been doing, Pat, and thanks for joining us. And you too, Paul, and everyone else here. We have these conversations every Wednesday at 9, although we will be here next week, but probably not the following. Hope you'll join us again. We will continue this conversation. I will share the link to the recording. And if you have further questions you didn't get to ask or comments, feel free to chime in on a group email. So thanks again, everybody. Hope to see some of you next week.
Well, thanks for having us.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been very interesting.
Bye-bye.